All right, can I have everybody's attention, please? If you have your cell phone, please turn that off. We don't want any interruptions. If you have it on vibrate, don't look excited if that goes off. You don't want anybody attracting any attention. I'm going to introduce Caroline Efstation. She is sponsored by the University of Florida. She has a bachelor's degree in biology. She has studied for 2 years at the Barry University in biomedical sciences. She has received her master's degree in biological sciences at the Florida Atlantic University in 2011. She is pursuing her doctorate in entomology and nematology at the University of Florida. Her research focus is on improving conservation of wild birds with the use of insecticides as part of an integral pest management program. She also works in subterranean termite lab, examining the symbiotic role of bacteria within the termite nest. I'm definitely going to let her explain that. She was a veterinarian technician for 15 years, 5 of which she spent with a board-certified avian veterinarian, and she was a Florida State wildlife rehabilitator for 10 years. She's been working with finches, softbills, and parrots for more than 25 years. So I think we got somebody who knows what she's talking about. All right, so please let me introduce Caroline, and we'll look forward to hearing your talk.
I am not that tall. Ooh, it got dark in here. I can't see anyone. Well, good afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, and hopefully I won't put you to sleep. So we're going to talk about insecticides and also integrated pest management and how we can actually eliminate and reduce the amount of insecticides we use. So before we go into the actual insecticides and what we should use with our birds, I just want to quickly mention toxicity and labeling, since this is an important safety concern when we use any type of insecticide or any other pesticide. So all of your labels are going to have what we call signal warnings, and there's basically 3 of them: danger, warning, and caution. And these only refer to the toxicity for the applicator. They do not refer to toxicity for the environment or for any other vertebrates, any of your pets or birds, only the applicator, which in this case would be us. And I'm just going to introduce the concept of the LD50. This is a lethal dose that's required to kill 50% of the test animals, and this is how we sort of evaluate how toxic a chemical is. And the higher the LD50, the less toxic it is, the better it is. So just real quickly, our categories. So category 1 for toxicity is going to be, our signal word is going to be danger. These are the worst ones. These are the ones that usually only professional applicators are going to be using. You're not going to get your hands on any of these. They're highly toxic, and you can see the LD50 is less than 50 milligrams per kilogram. Our second category, the signal word is warning. These are moderately toxic. Again, most of these you can actually use yourself. You can find some of these in your local hardware store. Your LD50 is a little bit higher. It's going to be 50 to 500 milligrams per kilogram. And then category 3 and 4 both use the signal words caution. Category 3, they're slightly toxic. You have your LD50 from 500 to 5,000 milligrams per kilogram. And then category 4s are considered pretty much non-toxic, but you still have to use caution. And you can see your LD50 now is over 5,000 milligrams per kilogram. And again, all of these are going to be your toxicity levels to the applicator, which is us. No environmental toxicity and no animal toxicity are included in these categories. So I'm going to introduce to you guys today the concept of integrated pest management, and this is sort of the new frontier in insect management. The concept of this is to use multiple techniques and not just rely on your insecticides. But it's not a ban on insecticides, so we're not saying we're going to get rid of all insecticide use, but we're going to try to limit it and then introduce other things like biological control and trapping and pheromones to try to reduce the amount of insecticides that we can use. So it sort of promotes, an intellectual manner that's compatible with other methods. So instead of like, let's just spray the daylights out of everything and pour insecticides all over the place, let's see if we can reduce that use. So the reason integrated pest management is better is it's going to minimize insecticide use, and this is going to reduce environmental contamination. I think we're all aware of the problems with environmental contamination and insecticides and how they biomagnify through the food chain. A good example was DDT. When that was being sprayed, that was affected a lot of birds with the thinning of the eggshells. It's also going to reduce damage to non-target species. Now, non-target species are going to be our species not only of vertebrates, but of insects. There's a lot of beneficial insects out there. We don't want to kill all of the good insects along with the bad insects. So by using integrated pest management, we can be more specific in the pests that we're targeting and reduce the impact on the non-target. And then we're going to supplement this with other things like biological control, environmental things. And also, I used to do a lot of work with antibiotic resistance. Insecticide resistance is almost as rampant as the antibiotic resistance. A lot of pests, especially mites, are becoming resistant to almost all of our insecticides. So by reducing the use of insecticides and supplementing it with other things, we can hopefully slow that resistance down. So chemicals that we can use in our urban pest management are going to be insecticides. They're still the go-to thing, the number one thing we're going to use. But we're going to supplement that with insect growth regulators, semiochemicals, microorganisms, and also some baits. And we're going to go over all of these in detail. So let's start with our insecticides. There's many groups of insecticides. These are some of the more common ones. Your organochlorines and organophosphates are pretty toxic to the environment, and they're pretty toxic to us. DDT is the most famous one. It's been banned in this country. They still use it in parts of Africa because the mosquito populations are just so bad, but it's pretty much been eliminated for the most part. Organophosphates came in. They're not as persistent in the environment as the organochlorines, but they're still fairly persistent and they're still very toxic. These are ones that you're never going to use around your birds. The only ones that you're going to use around your birds, I've sort of bolded and made larger here, which are your carbamates, pyrethroids, and your avermectins. Nicotinoids and phenylpyrazoles are usually used in baits a lot. These are also toxic to birds. So your carbamates, which is carbamyl, which is your 7 dust, is essentially non-toxic to birds. Same thing with your pyrethroids. Permethrin is the one that we most commonly use with birds. And then your avermectins, I'm sure you all, I spelled ivermectin wrong there. Sorry about that. Ivermectin, I think we're all familiar with. We use this as an injectable for a lot of ectoparasites and also internal parasites. So these three are essentially non-toxic to our birds. And these are the three, if you're going to use any insecticides in or around your aviaries, these are the three you're going to want to stick with. And I'll mention, I think most of you were probably in my talk yesterday with the vector-borne diseases, and I was brought to my attention that there's been an outbreak in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of West Nile virus. And we're going to talk more about mosquito control, but I just wanted to bring it up. My lab partner, Paul Bardunez, back at the university, was up late last night going through the records and trying to find out what they were actually using, and they are using pyrethroids. So these are about the safest things that can be sprayed around us and our birds since they are essentially non-toxic. So this is what they're using. So the people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I wouldn't be too concerned with the spraying that's going to be going on as far as affecting your birds. I'm just going to talk about botanicals really quickly because I always get questions about using more naturally derived things. Most of these come from plants. Some of them are very toxic. Nicotinoids come from the nicotine plant, and it's highly toxic. So just because it comes from a plant and it's naturally derived doesn't mean it's going to be very safe. You will notice here we've got our permethrin. So the permethrin comes from the chrysanthemum plant, and it is a natural derivative. And now we have synthetic pyrethroids, which I'll go over in a minute. But the rest of these, especially the nicotine, they're not very toxic to mammals and us, but they are toxic to birds. So you do have to be cautious with the botanicals and don't just assume because they're naturally derived that they're not going to harm your birds. because they can. So permethrin is a naturally derived chemical from the chrysanthemum plant. The LD50 for us is about 1,500 milligrams per kilogram, so it's fairly high. The problem with this one is it's not very photostable. So if you use it outdoors within 24 hours, it's going to break down. It's not going to be effective anymore. They do use it with their synergist, and most of the bird sprays, you have those mite sprays that you'll find in the pet stores, most of them have the permethrin in them, and they also have the synergist. And I've been using them for years on birds. I spray them directly on birds, even babies within the nest, and it's not toxic to them. But if you have anything outdoors with the sunlight, it's not going to be very effective. You can use it to kill them on the bird. If you have a bird covered with mites, you can spray the bird down and kill the mites. But you'll probably have to reapply if you're out in the sunlight, because they're just not that stable. But they are fairly safe for the birds. So they came up with the synthetic pyrethroids. These are much longer lasting, and they are more stable. They're basically non-toxic to us. They're non-toxic to the birds. They're very safe to spray on birds, around birds, in the nest. There's quite a few of them. The one that we stick with the most in birds is the permethrin. This is the one that all the LD50 tests have been done on. And pretty much every bird product I've ever seen has permethrin or pyrethrum. But they are toxic to fish. So if you're using these outside, don't use them near ponds. Don't allow water runoff into ponds because they are highly toxic to fish. So just to go over the LD50, for birds, for permethrin, you can see 9,900 milligrams for ducks and 13,000, 15,000. These are really high LD50, so they're essentially non-toxic. Carbamyl, which is our 7 dust, which you can also put on your birds, put in your nests, they're very safe. You can see not as high as the permethrin, but they're still pretty high and fairly non-toxic. And just to give you a comparison, this is table salt for house sparrows. You can see the LD50 is much lower for that than for the permethrin. So, and permethrin is actually safer than table salt for birds. So whenever I do a lot of research, and all of my research right now, we are working with the permethrin because the LD50 is so much higher than the carbaryl. And also there's a repellency that goes along with permethrin that carbaryl doesn't have as much. So we've been doing some studies with mites, and I'm sure a lot of you have had problems with mites. We used a dust, was absolutely useless. So what we ended up doing is our first clutches, we had very high mortality due to nest mites. And we were using European starlings and purple martins for our study. And what we ended up doing for the second clutch is we went out and we sprayed permethrin. It was a 0.05% solution, which you can get pretty much at any of your hardware stores. And we followed the label instructions, and we used the highest dilution, the highest amount dilution, which I think was like 1 part to 19 parts water. And we sprayed the inside of the nest box till runoff. We sprayed the nesting material. I actually had eggs in there. I pulled the eggs out, sprayed the whole box down, let it dry, put the eggs back in. And these were the only birds on this particular site that actually fledged. So the permethrin seemed to be fairly effective against the mites. We did have some mites in there still, but we were able to at least allow the birds to survive and fledge. So I would recommend, if you have mite problems, to use the permethrin spray and just apply it to run off when the birds aren't in it, let it dry, and then hopefully that will help. We didn't have any luck with the 7 dust on the mites. If you went in there every single day and dusted your babies and added dust, that would probably be effective, but just as a one-time thing, your permethrin is going to be a lot better. So one thing I want to bring up is insect growth regulators. I don't think a lot of people are really familiar with this. One of the nice things about them is that they're targeting the insects. They're analogs of hormones that allow them to molt and grow. So by altering their growth patterns, we can actually keep the insects from becoming mature, and they'll end up just dying. And these are going to be pretty safe around your animals because they're hormone analogs, and since birds and us don't have the same hormones as the insects, they're not really going to affect us. So these are some examples of, these are what we call juvenile hormone mimics, and a lot of these are really good for fleas, cockroaches, ants. Most of these things are going to be in with your baits. So, have like those little bait stations. And bait stations are great because you can put them outside of your cages. If you have massive problems with ants or cockroaches inside of your aviaries, what I do is I take the little bait stations and I put them in the corner. Cockroaches and ants, especially cockroaches, like to run along borders. It makes them feel safer. So you always want to put these things in the corners of the cages. And I just put those big, heavy black flower pots over them that have the little holes in the bottom so the roaches can get in, and I put a cylinder block on top so the birds can't get it. So this way I can actually have bait traps inside of my aviaries, but the birds can't get to them. So I try to put them outside, but some of you probably have really large aviaries, and if you have a lot of problems with the roaches inside, or especially with the ants, you can put them inside. But remember to keep them along the sides of the cages, especially for the roaches, because the roaches aren't going to be running around the middle of your cage usually unless they're scared. So another thing is biological insecticides, and I actually do a lot of work with this in termites. They've been trying to kill termites with Metarhizium isopoli for years, and it's just not working. But there are some that work pretty good, and we're going to go over that a little bit. And again, a lot of these are put into our baits. So baits are great because you can use really low doses and you can confine them into a small container. And what the insects do is they actually go in there and they take it back to their colony. And then they'll actually kill more individuals. So this is a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. There's a subspecies of it that's really good for mosquitoes, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. This bacteria is the most widely used bacteria for biological control in insects. It is absolutely not harmful to birds, any vertebrates, or us. It's very specific to the insects, so it's very safe to spray in the environment. They've been using it for decades, and there hasn't been any problems. So this is a very safe alternative to insecticides because it's not going to affect the environment or our birds. Another thing are semiochemicals, and these are any kind of chemicals that are going to basically modify insect behavior. So we have two types. We have pheromones, and these are going to be used within the same species, and then alleochemicals, which are used for different species. So we're going to go over some of those. So just some different kinds really quickly. We have sex pheromones, dispersion or oviposition, which is when they're laying their eggs. Aggression, this is actually someone that got bit by fire ants. Alarm pheromones, these are a bunch of little aphids running for their life. Aggregation, so when they find a really good food source, they send out pheromones and say, hey, come over here, there's really good food. Trail pheromones, these are our subterranean termites and ants. We've all seen ants walking along trails. Once somebody finds a good piece of food, they go back and drop a trail so everybody else can follow. And recognition pheromones, well, familiar with these with ants. If they don't recognize each other, they'll start fighting. So what we can do is we can interfere with some of these behaviors. So one thing we can use with these is detection. So part of integrative pest management is not going out every single week and spraying insecticides or applying dust. Let's monitor, let's see if we even have a problem. And this works really good with your cockroaches and your flies. So what you can do, and we can use pheromones, and I'm sure all of you have seed moss. So this is sort of like a little seed moth trap. You can actually put little pheromone baits in there that are going to signal them, and they're going to go in there and they'll get stuck on the sticky paper. Obviously, sticky paper, we want to keep this away from our birds. So I know I've had birds accidentally fly into sticky traps, and it's not fun. So make sure these are outside of your aviaries, or at least if they're inside, your birds are clipped, or just try to be, when the bird gets out, quickly run over and grab all the sticky traps off. So I've done that several times. So these are really good. They work well with the seed moss just to try to control them. But they're also good for, just to see if you have a problem. There's no reason to be putting down insecticide or baits or gels if you don't even have a problem. So having some sticky traps around your house or around your aviaries just to see if you have any roaches or flies is always a good thing. And this will actually head off a large infestation. So if you see like one or two cockroaches, it's like, okay, well maybe I should put some bait down, rather than wait until you walk in your aviary one day and there's 100 of them running away from you. So mass trapping is not, the most recommended way to deal with an infestation, but in combination with other things, it can help. And the best thing it does is removes a large portion of your adults. So you want to use your baits, because your baits, they're going to go in there, they're going to eat some of it, they're going to bring it back to the nest, and then they're going to feed their babies, and then the babies are going to die. So that's the difference between your baits and just your pheromone traps. Your pheromone traps are obviously going to be attracted to it, and then they're going to get stuck. So they're going to die, so you're going to kill your adult population, but the babies are still going to be replicating. So, well, they're not replicating, but they're still growing, so you're not going to get them. So that's why using sticky traps with pheromones for monitoring and reducing, if you have a very heavy infestation and you don't want to use any pesticides, you can use that to remove a lot of them. And then in addition, have your bait traps, because then they're going to go back and they're going to kill the babies as well. And then we can disrupt mating. So this is where your pheromones come in. Obviously, they're going to use a female pheromone, so the males are going to be attracted. So you're going to end up with all of your males stuck on your traps, and then there's not going to be any more reproduction. And that's one way. That works really well with moths. And then I kind of already talked about the baits. So the baits are usually, something they like to eat, and it's going to be mixed with a poison. They're going to eat it, they're going to take it back to their nest, and then they're going to end up killing the nest. So this works the best with ants and cockroaches. So we've talked a little bit about baits. It's just going to be an attractive food source mixed with our insecticide. You want something that's slow acting though, because you want them to be able to eat it, survive long enough to go back to the nest, and then feed it to other individuals or into the babies. So if it kills them right away, it's not going to help that. The best thing about it is it's a very, very, very small dose of insecticide. So this is going to be safer than using high doses of it. And it's also more targeted, so we're not going to affect our non-target, possibly beneficial insects. We're going to stay with our pest species. So, the advantages of it, they're easy to use. Like I said, just put them around your house or outside your aviaries, inside if you have a big problem. And again, slow acting. Gel baits are nice. I wouldn't use gel baits anywhere where your birds are, but if you have, especially in your house, the gel bait for the cockroaches, you just basically run along the bottom of your cabinets, because what they do is they run on the floor across the cabinets, and they pick this up on their feet. So these are good to use if you have feed sheds where you store all your feed and prepare diets. The gel baits work really good in feed stations, but I wouldn't use them in your aviaries, because if the birds are exploring one day, you don't want them eating the bait, because most of these baits are going to be somewhat toxic. Ivermectin, which is a version of ivermectin, is actually very safe. And I was walking around the other day, I went to the grocery store, and I was looking at all the ingredients, and a lot of the roach ingredients, roach bait and ant bait, is actually ivermectin. So when you go to the store, choose ivermectin, because that's going to be the safest. If your bird accidentally gets into it, it's probably not going to cause them any problem. Or some of the other ones like fipronil works really good, but it's very toxic to birds. Okay, so our friend the cockroach. Now, cockroaches can harbor diseases, mostly bacterial, and they're also just kind of gross, and we really don't want them running around in our aviaries. So cockroaches eat a lot of stuff. I love that they like hair and fingernails, and I'm sure they eat feathers too. And we all know they like our birds' food. But they do require water, so you're usually going to have water sources nearby. This is why they like our kitchens. And that's why they like leaky faucets, because they have a water source. There's different versions and groupings of cockroaches. We have our domestic, which are only going to be inside of our houses. Periodomestic, they usually live inside, but they'll also go outside. And then you just have your outdoor species. So here's just a nice picture of some of the different sizes of them. I've never actually seen this one in Florida. I don't know that I want to. Okay, so these are all going to be your indoor cockroaches. These are probably the most common, your Germans. So the biggest thing with cockroaches is cleanliness. They love dirty places. So you want to make sure that your feed rooms are clean, everything's picked up off of the floor. You want to go around your yard, mow your grass. Don't have piles of old pots or stumps rotting, because these are the kind of places that the cockroaches are going to live in. Insect growth regulators, we've been over this. These are the two that are usually the ones that work the best. And again, we went over our baits, having your bait stations outside of your aviaries, and you can use your gels inside your house and inside of your feed rooms. Okay, so these are the indoor-outdoor cockroaches. Cockroaches like little crevices that they can hide in, so you want to make sure that inside the house, you want to make sure all your caulking is sealed. You don't want holes of caulking because that's where they're going to hide. Also, cracks in wood and stuff. And then outdoors, again, tree holes, wood piles, piles of pots. These are places that they're going to want to live. So if you reduce all of this, you're going to reduce the population of cockroaches on your property because they're not going to have anywhere to live. Okay, ants, as far as vectors, really aren't very important, but they are a nuisance. And we have the invasive fire ant, which luckily is starting to go down in incidence, at least in Florida. But if these get into your nests and you have baby birds or eggs, they can kill your baby birds. So kind of similar with the cockroaches, we want to make sure everything's sealed up, especially in our houses and in our feed rooms. If you have nurseries, outdoor nurseries that are enclosed in outdoor buildings, this is very important. Obviously, in our aviaries, this isn't going to work very well. Again, baits are the best thing. Low dose, they're easy to use. We can apply them either inside or outside our aviaries. You don't want to be spraying any of your ant sprays that you would buy at Home Depot. Most of those are not going to be permethrin based. You can use permethrin sprays if you find them. They will kill the ants, but it's going to be a contact kind of thing. You will get some residual effect for maybe a few days, but between washing and rainwater, it's going to wash most of the chemical away. So your bait stations are your best bet. If you have a major problem, you can use any of your mite or lice sprays that have permethrin in them. If you have baby birds that are all of a sudden covered in ants, you can use that. That will kill the ants, but it's not going to be good for long-term control. So you can use perimeter treatments. These are going to be the sprays that you get at Home Depot, but you want to use these on buildings. You don't want to be using these on your aviaries. For fire ants, you can use baits, and they do sell drenches and injections that you can actually put inside the piles. Okay, one of my favorites. These guys do vector a lot of diseases, but they're also just annoying and they're a nuisance. And you're going to your aviaries and you've got them flying all over you and they're in the food, and they do carry a lot of bacteria diseases. And some of them, a lot of the biting flies, your horse flies and stuff, actually can vector viruses. So we want to eliminate as many of them as we possibly can. So this is one of the main reasons, is because they are medically important and they can vector diseases. So again, just like with the cockroaches, we want to do sanitation. We want to reduce the amount of debris and breeding sites that we have on our properties and around our aviaries. Manure, if any of you have horses or cattle, nearby or, in the same property, make sure your manure, clean it up. Don't have giant manure piles. I had a friend that had all these problems, and she had horses, and her manure pile was right next to her aviary. Well, it wasn't too hard to figure that problem out. We can also use biological control with some of our flies. You can use screens. If you're in areas with the mosquitoes, screens are important to prevent the mosquitoes. They're also going to keep the flies out of your aviaries. And one of the easiest things is just to capture the adults using your sticky traps. Again, sticky traps, though, can't be inside your aviaries. The UV fly traps, all those light traps, they're okay. I don't like them because they make a lot of noise. Sometimes, is it really bothering the birds to have things zapping all night and those lights? The other thing is they're going to kill a lot of your good insects too. And, we want dragonflies around. We want the lacewings and things because they're predators. They're going to be eating the mosquitoes. They're going to be eating some of these flies. So we don't want to be killing all of our good insects in these UV traps. And the bigger insects tend to stay away from the sticky traps more than they will the light traps. So these are just some breeding sites for some of the more common flies that we're going to see. So they all like bird food, and most of us are going to feed vegetables and fruits, and this is going to attract them. So sticky traps are good, but I'm going to show you something else that is a little bit better. And these are actually researchers at the University of Florida, Dr. Kohler and Dr. DeClaro. They actually came up with this novel filth fly control device, and they actually came up with it for the Army. There's a warfare protection program that helps protect our soldiers when they go overseas from filth flies and all of the diseases. So they actually came up with this, and they've patented it, and they actually sell it. And I apologize, I didn't get a picture of that, but this is what they came up with. And they did some research, and what they did was try to decide what color flies like the best. So they tested yellows and reds, whites, everything. Well, it turns out they like blue. And they really like blue with black lines. Why this came out white here and black here, I don't know, I apologize. But you can see this is supposed to be black lines. The flies preferred blue with black lines. So that's why they made these traps blue with the black lines. So what they do, and you can actually make these yourself if you can find either blue cardboard or this corrugated stuff, instead of spending, I think they cost like $10. They're these collapsible ones, and you just unfold them, and they actually have black lines on them. So you can buy them or you can make your own. And basically all they did was take this black thread and they soaked it in permethrin. And then they just constructed it. They've got some horse pellets down here, and the flies are attracted to it because of the color, and then they land on these little lines and they get the permethrin on them and they die. So it's better than a sticky trap because it's actually going to attract them. So you can see how they made them. So since they prefer the blue color, they go, and this is just some pictures that they took. So here's their cat food. And they have their little trap that they made, and they just put a bucket underneath there to catch all the dead flies. And they have it near the dumpster. You can see it's right here. So if you like arts and crafts, you can save yourself some money and make it, and you can get the permethrin at any of your feed stores. Just soak your threads in there, and it's a cheap, effective way of controlling them. So this is inside one of the insect rearing facilities. And again, fairly simple to make and works really good. Okay, so our mosquitoes. So these are the ones, if you remember from yesterday, that are going to vector all of our diseases. Our equine and eastern and western equine encephalitis, St. Louis encephalitis, and our West Nile, which now we all have to be a little more vigilant because there's an outbreak in Dallas. And they also vector the protozoans and some nematodes. And in addition, of course, they're just annoying. Nobody wants to get bit by them. And if you have tiny birds like finches, if you have enough of them, they could end up suffering from some blood loss. So some physical things we can do, obviously the biggest one is screening. You know, if you just screen your aviaries, it's not always feasible. If you have really large aviaries, just economically just may not be something that you can do. The other thing you can do is eliminate breeding sites. So mosquitoes lay their larvae in water, and the larvae have a little siphon, and they just kind of hang there, and they have their little siphon out, and they just grow and develop into these blood-sucking mosquitoes, and then they come out and they bite all of us and our birds. So the best thing you can do, one of the easiest things, is just make sure that there's nothing that can collect water on your property. So some things that we may not always, well, any container that can hold water. But pool covers, in Texas, I think we got a lot of pools. We got a lot of pools in Florida. You know, when it rains, you get those pool covers, and it stays there just long enough for these mosquitoes to hatch and develop. Also gutters, make sure your gutters are clean. If you've got a clog there, it's going to fill up with water. That's a prime site for mosquitoes to be breeding. And also, if you put your garbage can lids upside down. If you have recycling bins outside that collect water, go ahead and drill holes in them so the water goes out, because mosquitoes really like recycling bins. So this is going to eliminate a lot of the breeding sites on your property, and that alone is going to make a big difference. And we can also use biological control. Birds, of course, not all of our birds, but wild birds will eat the mosquitoes, and your dragonflies, things like that. So I don't know the names of all the plants, but you can always put, dragonfly-friendly plants in your yard to kind of attract other insects that aren't going to bother our birds, so beneficial ones, but that the dragonflies will be attracted to, so they'll eat some of the mosquitoes. If you have any ponds, make sure they're stocked with fish, because the fish will eat the larvae. So obviously you can't, if you have a pond, it's a giant water source, but the fish will eat your mosquito larvae. And then this bacteria, they actually make, well, here's just some examples of, tires are a big one too. If you have old tires sitting outside, they love tires. Just jars, buckets, anything that's got a standing source of water, they're going to breed in. So you can actually use larvicides, which is the biological control with the bacillus bacteria we're talking about. And they have granules and they have these little donuts. And you can just put these in water sources. So if you have groundwater, if your property floods, obviously you can't do anything with that. It's not a bucket. We can't pick it up and dump it out. You can go ahead and get these. Any of your Home Depot, if you have Home Depots here, but any of your hardware stores will have these, and as soon as you get that standing water, go throw these in there. And they're spores, and the larvae are gonna pick up the spores and they're gonna die. And again, it's not gonna harm the environment, it's not gonna harm us, it's not gonna harm our birds. So as soon as you have standing water, so any of you that live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area now, I know you guys aren't having that much rain, but if you do get a downpour, go out immediately, buy these and put them in those standing water holes, and then hopefully kill off your larvae. So in conclusion, what we can do is prevention. So this is one of the biggest parts of the integrated pest management, is to not just continually apply insecticides all the time or wait until we have a problem. We want to head off the problem before we have it, and prevention is a good way of doing this. So making sure that we have all of our cracks, caulking covered up so we don't have harborage sites for your cockroaches. Also, indoors, make sure you have weather stripping on your door so you're not inviting all the little cockroaches and ants to come running in. Monitoring is a good way if you don't have a problem now. If you're monitoring, you'll know when you begin to have a problem before it's actually uncontrollable, and you won't have to use a lot of insecticides, and you can start putting out your bait traps. So again, your glue traps with pheromones are the best thing to use for monitoring roaches and ants and even some flies. And again, this kind of goes with, monitoring with the trapping. One of the other things when you're monitoring is you don't want to just put out one trap. Put them all over your property, because you might have areas where it's going to be a higher incidence of your insects. So if you just put out one trap, say the east side of your property, and you check it once or twice a week and you never see anything, that doesn't mean that on the other side of your property you might have a lot more. So you want to put them in multiple areas. That way, if you do have a big infestation, you may not have to treat your whole property, you may just have to treat that one area where they seem to be concentrated on. So applying multiple traps, and these traps are very cheap. They're just sticky paper with a pheromone. So economically, it's a lot cheaper than buying tons of insecticide and risking your bird's health. And outside, especially those of you who have outdoor aviaries, keeping your grass mowed, not having piles of debris and things like that. And garbage is always a big one. They're going to attract flies just because of the smell, so keep your garbage cans away from your aviaries. And I just want to remind you again of the insect growth regulators, since they are highly effective and they're very safe because they're targeting hormones that we don't have and our birds don't have. And they call it the Peter Pan effect, because basically they never grow up. They can't ever get into their final molting stage. So they just stay babies and eventually they end up dying. And again, don't forget about biological control. You can go online and they actually have catalogs where you can order beneficial insects. One thing I didn't mention, there's something called Teflon tape, and you can actually, it's supposed to be really slippery. I've had mixed, just forgot the word, mixed results with it. The idea is it's real slippery, and you can put it around your feed bowls and the ants can't climb up it. It works better with ants. Some of the cockroaches still get up on it, but you can buy that at your hardware store and try that if you have them crawling into your bowls a lot. Okay, so hopefully I didn't forget anything. That's my email. This is a center I work at, and again, I mentioned this yesterday, but if you have universities near where you live and they have extension services, the scientists there, what their job is at extension services is to help the public and educate them. So if you ever have problems with certain pests, you can always take those pests, bring them to the centers, and they'll ID them for you. You can look us up online. You can always mail us stuff. We have an entire entomology department down there that can ID pest species. If you have a pest and you're having issues eliminating it, it could be that it's a different species than what you would normally see. And if we can identify it, then we can help you with problems with eliminating it. So that's all I have. I'll take any questions. Boric acid it's a chemical. It works really good with insects. It's very toxic to flies, ants, cockroaches. The problem is it's also toxic to birds. Now, I have people who mix boric acid with Sevin dust, and they put it on the very bottom of the nest, and it's actually more effective than using the Sevin dust alone. I would not put it anywhere where the birds can get in direct contact with it. So if you have, a box and you have your boric acid on the bottom, and then you've got your nest material, that would probably be the safest way to use it. So I personally have not used it, but I know a lot of people that do, and they'll put it on the bottom, and they tell me it works. But they also put the Sevin dust in there. But I know the Sevin dust by itself, unless you're applying it when you have an infestation and you continually apply it, long term it really doesn't work. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I know it's very abrasive to some of the exoskeletons, but I know they'll also ingest it, and I think it acts as a stomach poison. So if we're ingesting it, it's going to affect our stomach, and usually vomiting and diarrhea. And the mode of action on birds, off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with, but I can definitely look that up and get back with you. Yes? Diatomaceous earth is really good in gardens. It's real effective against fleas. What it does is it scratches the exoskeleton of the insects, and it basically puts holes in it, and then they actually desiccate. It's really good in the gardens and everything. I wouldn't recommend using it with the birds. Parrots, it might be better, but if you have any ground birds, I'm afraid they might eat some of it. And I don't know, especially like your doves and stuff, because they like to eat the grit. But it would be good if you have outside of your aviaries. Honestly, I wouldn't want to recommend putting it inside the aviaries because I don't actually know what the birds would do with it and if it would hurt them. But as far as gardens, especially with flea problems, it works really good. And so if you have planters around your house, you can certainly add that. It's inexpensive, it's not toxic to the environment, and it will help control some of those. But most of the insects that are going to bother our birds aren't going to be walking around on the ground, and it's not really going to help with your flies. Cockroaches, it has limited ability to help because cockroaches like to stay on edges and walk on things. They're not going to be walking around in the open so much, so it's not really going to help with them too much. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
They say it kills internal parasites too.
Really? Okay.
Also, if you have aviary or cages on legs,
Mm-hmm.
you take one of those Ziploc kind of containers and fill it with diatomaceous earth and put it under the feet. The ants will go over that.
Oh, that's a good idea. So she's saying to take the Ziploc plastic containers and put the diatomaceous earth in them and then put it under the cage leg. Yeah, that's actually a very good idea. Where I work, we only use it in agriculture. We don't use it for the animals. There's also something called tanglefoot, which you can put around your legs if you have, like freestanding cages with legs. You can put tanglefoot. I use tanglefoot in my research, and the rats still get over the tanglefoot sometimes. It does tend to stop the ants. The problem with tanglefoot is it's very, very sticky, so you don't want to be touching it, and you can only use it in areas where your birds can't get to it because they will get stuck to it. But that's a good idea with the plastic container and that. And I haven't seen anything where they're mixing it with the seed. I'll definitely look into that. That's interesting. So thank you for that.
What can you tell us about product chemicide, where it comes from, and how effective is it on insects and so forth? Direct spray on several bugs and critters in the house, it seems to kill them, but I've been told that you can spray it around and it works in a residual effect, and I find that to be a false statement.
Okay, the chemical is that a product or a chemical name? Chemicide, is that what you said?
Chemicide. It's some kind of something they get from a tree or a
So it would be a bit, is that the chemical name or is that the manufacturer common name? Do you happen to know the chemical name? I'm not familiar with that brand name. But if you give me the chemical, most of your botanicals are actually more toxic, and they don't have the lasting effect because they are naturally derived, so the sunlight, rainwater is going to wash them away. So that's why your synthetics usually work better for long term. And I can talk with you later, and I'll see if we can find that chemical name. Maybe I can answer that better for you. Dr. Stafford? Do you want me to? Okay. Okay. Part of my research is actually what I'm trying to do is prevent infestation of Africanized honeybees into the wild nest cavities of scarlet macaws and hyacinths, leers, and many other species. And so originally what our plan was to take permethrin and to spray it inside our nest cavities, which we actually did our first pilot study in South Florida this year. We used European starlings and purple martins as a model that we want to try to develop the protocol to then use with the parrots. Dust is absolutely useless. We found that out real quick. We had 42 nest boxes up at 4 sites. We had 8 infested with Africanized honeybees. So dust wasn't effective, so we tried the spraying, and we didn't have anyone move in, but our study really wasn't set up for that. So what we're trying to do now is what we're calling a push-pull strategy. So we're using integrated pest management, and we want to reduce the amount of insecticides. So what we're going to try to do is actually, we're going to use permethrin because it is the least toxic to our birds. It's very toxic to bees. It also has a repellent effect to it, which your 7 dust doesn't actually have. So that's why we chose to use permethrin. And what we would like to do is treat the boxes. And what bees do is when the old queen, when there's too many bees, the old queen, not the new queen, there'll be new queens developing. The old queen takes a portion of the swarm and takes them off somewhere, and they find a branch or something, and they sit there. And then they send their scout bees out, and they go and they start looking for cavities. And they come back and they do a waggle dance. And based on how well they dance, they'll dance, and then some other bees, they'll tell them where the cavity is, these other bees will go. So what ends up happening is something called quorum sensing. And you'll usually have 4 or 5 bees that are dancing for different cavities. And basically someone's gonna win, and eventually most of the hive is gonna go with them, and then they're just gonna take off and they're gonna set up residence in here. But what these scout bees do is when they go to these cavities, they actually walk around for about 40 to 45 minutes, and they actually count their steps. So they can figure out exact dimensions of these cavities. And then they go back and they dance according to the cavity's worth. So what we want to do is we want to interrupt this behavior. And what we're going to try to do is actually put permethrin in the nest cavities, and we want to actually just target the tops so we don't actually have to spray the insecticide where the birds and the eggs and the babies are, because most of the time they're going to walk the whole cavity, but they're going to put their comb on the top. So they're going to spend most of their time walking right up there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put low doses. And because we're just interrupting the behavior, we can do very low doses that are even more safe for the birds. They're going to walk on this, they're going to get kind of drunk. They're not going to feel so good. They're going to go back to the hive, and they're not going to dance very well. So we're hoping they're going to lose the dance off. And some other scout bee that found another non-permethrin treated cavity is going to go ahead and win, and they're going to go over there. Now, the problem, and Dr. Stafford and Dr. Boyd, I've been working with them on this and working with Roan McNabb in Guatemala, is that there's some of these places have like 50% of the cavities are infested with bees. So what we're thinking is there's just not enough places for the bees out there. So what might happen is if you treat all your boxes and they all are going to be drunk when they come back, you're going to end up in a nest cavity anyway. So what we're going to do now is a push-pull strategy where we're going to put up swarm traps with pheromones. They're going to actually track the bees. And so what we're hoping is going to happen is we're going to have one bee drunk with permethrin because he found the bird nest. He's going to come back. He's going to dance really bad. The one that went to the swarm trap with the pheromone, he's like, I found the best place. And we're going to make these swarm traps so they're the right size, the right opening that the bees prefer, because most of these parrot cavities are large, have large openings, and this is not what bees usually prefer. But if there's nowhere else to go, they're going to end up in there. So we got our bee with our swarm trap, our bee with the permethrin. They're going to come back. He's going to dance real bad. He's going to dance great. They're going to go to these swarm traps. So this is what we call a push-pull. So we're trying to push them away from the nest cavities by applying the insecticide and pull them towards these swarm traps. So the combination of this, we think, is going to be the most effective way of trying to prevent these bees from taking up these cavities for these parrots. And hopefully Dr. Boyd and Dr. Stafford are going to help me actually implement this. And we are doing more field tests in Florida. We're going to use barn owls now, along with the starlings, and really try to get this protocol under control, because this is a big problem in a lot of the neotropics. So hopefully that answered your question. Could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you. Weed killers? Oh, Roundup. So the question is, weed killers, how toxic are they to our birds? Is that what you're asking?
Do they kill the insects as well?
Most of them, it depends on the chemical. Most of them aren't going to kill the insects because they're targeted towards your weeds. A lot of the chemicals, if they're insecticides, are going to be targeted more for your insecticides. The problem with it is they're broad spec, so they kill a lot of the insecticides. Most of your herbicides are going to be toxic to mammals, fish, birds, and the weeds, and some to the insects. But with your weed killers, the most important thing is water runoff into aquatics. So they're usually highly toxic to fish. And if you're not spraying them directly where the birds can get at them, or any aerosol droplets are going to get to them, you're fairly safe with them. They're not going to be as toxic as some of the other stuff. But you always want to follow your label instructions and use caution. And I'm out of time? Okay, thank you.